To all those who are here, thanks for coming. We've got Josephine Bush coming up to talk about her lightning talk, how to audit SQL Server for free. So so if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to those. Josephine, I'm assuming you want to get those after your lightning talk and we can chat afterwards.
Yeah, I think so, because
Okay.
I was thinking it'd be so fast, we might not do questions throughout, but I could stop at certain points and see if there's any questions. I'll just stop because there's some good stopping points now that I have some extra time. So,
All right. So
yeah.
feel free to put your questions in chat and we'll take, Josephine will take questions as she's able. So at that point, I'm going to mute myself, turn off my camera and turn it over to Josephine.
Okay, thank you. All right, so how to audit SQL Server for free. That's the presentation we're in that I'm giving. And I'm Josephine Bush. I have a lot of IT experience. I've been a DBA for about maybe 10 years already now. And I am the author of Learn SQL Database Programming. And you can reach me on Twitter at HelloSQLKitty, and I blog at SQLKitty.com. I think a lot of people cringe when they hear auditing because they think, oh, they're going to get in trouble for doing something wrong. Like here in America, it's the IRS. If you get audited, you're like, oh boy, it's just I'm going to owe back taxes or penalties and all kinds of stuff. So it can be kind of terrifying. But I think auditing is a good thing. You want to make sure people are following proper procedure. And if you don't have procedures, the auditing can actually help you figure out what you might want that to look like, depending on what people are doing in there, which you don't think is a good idea. So maybe your company doesn't think it's important to audit. Maybe your company's required to audit, but you're not sure how to go about it. Or maybe your company doesn't want to spend or doesn't have money to spend on third-party tools. So, the options in SQL Server are good, they're pretty good for auditing. So, but even if you're not required to audit, I think it shouldn't stop you from auditing. I set it up mainly because I got tired of people saying, oh, the database is broken, something happened in there. And then I had no idea if it was or not because I wasn't auditing anything. And this really helped me to say to people, well, I didn't see anything change. And they usually run off in the other direction, some other direction then. And it actually turned out to be a really good thing that I prioritized the setup because then we were acquired by a more heavily regulated company and they really want us to be reviewing audit reports on a weekly basis. I already had this all set up. It was great. My boss was so happy. So basically you're in the dark, like I was saying, without auditing. Somebody comes to you, oh my God, this is broken in the database, and you have no idea because you don't even know really what changed. So it can help you see what changed something. Maybe that changes what broke something. And maybe a user was set up for one purpose and it got shared around and now everybody's using it. That happened with SA user at our company. And it was shared around and everybody was on it. And we had to audit to know who's using it, tell them, hey, we see you're using it, and go to them and get them off of that. And so you can pretty much audit anything in SQL Server so you can see anything that's changing. And I do a quick disclaimer on auditing because you have to be careful. You could overload or freeze up a production server because I didn't think it was possible, but it actually happened to me. I just thought, so if this was a SQL Server audit, this was not extended events. I'm gonna go through both of those in this session, but it's just gonna be hard anyway, even if you don't crash your server. If you have too much data, you're just gonna be weeding through everything. You're not gonna, it's just like as if you didn't know anything because you got too much audit data. So I just do less is more method of auditing. So the first way you can audit changes is with extended events, and I usually call it X events because less to say, especially when this is going to only be 10 minutes. So they're lightweight and flexible, and you can audit what users do with this, but you can also monitor or collect information like wait stats or connection info and other performance stuff as well. So it's not just for auditing what changes, when you set up with templates, it will feel familiar if you've used Profile or Trace before. And there's a few default ones I included in the screenshot here. These will come, some variation of them may, depending on your SQL Server version, will come already running or not, depending on what features you're using. I just point them out because don't get rid of them, don't stop them because SQL Server is using them. But you could also look at them to kind of get a feel for how they're configured. And if you don't know how to use extended events, it could help you see, okay, I see these bits and pieces are being used here. These are not for auditing so much as for the other stuff I mentioned, like performance and other things that SQL Server is collecting, but still gives you an idea at least how you could start. So extended events was first available in 2008, but then a graphical interface was added in 2012. So that makes it a lot easier for you to set stuff up. And you can do one of two ways in the GUI. Under management, there's extended events, so you can create a session by right-clicking. If you choose new session wizard, it'll help walk you through. So if you're not sure how you want to do it, or if you don't really know how to use extended events, that's X events, so much easier. Then you can use the wizard. Then maybe if you're a little more comfortable, new sessions is more dialog box pops up, and you just got to fill out the bits and pieces that you need there. So once you create that, you can watch the live data right from the GUI. It'll open up a tab for you. And I just showed you a couple examples of how you can do that here on the slide. And then one thing to note is that you might not see anything, because maybe you're auditing stuff that nothing happened that you're trying to capture, or you may see a ton of stuff because there's a bunch of stuff in the background maybe you didn't realize is happening, because I know that happened to me when I first started auditing. I was like, what is all this stuff that's happening? SQL Server is doing stuff in the background all the time with server $ accounts and all kinds of stuff. So so you can click through. It's just, lists. It'll keep flowing through into this into the screen for you if you want to just take a quick peek. But I find it better in the end, if you get comfortable with extended events, X events, or if you want to set up on a lot of servers, it's going to be a pain to go right-clicking on every single server and doing the GUI. So here is an example of how you can create a session just to capture. This is going to capture here. This one's going to capture anything SA does. So in order to do that, we do the RPC completed and we do the SQL batch completed events, and then what we do is we put a where clause on that, say just SA, because I only want to see SA in this case. Or you could do multiple users, or you could do I just want to see a schema, or I just want to see a database. There's any number of ways you can filter these things. And then of course you have to add a target. There's a bunch of different targets. I have them listed farther down on the slide deck here, but one option is a file. So I always say don't put your file on the C drive or the data or log drives, things that SQL Server uses. I usually put on like an E drive or something that's, in this case, I was using Linux at the time, so that's complete, anyway, but just don't mix it all in. And I tend to do things where I don't create files that are gigantic. You'll see the max file size is 50, that's in megabytes, and the max number of files is 4, just because I want to make sure that I'm not just creating these giant files that are totally unqueryable, because they are in XML, and so it's going to be really hard to pick stuff out of there. A lot of the other stuff here is just default values. And the last thing we do there is set it to start, because you don't want to sit in there disabled, because it's not going to do anything if it's disabled. So then I think it's a little tricky at first to do query X events with SQL query, but I think it's much more powerful. You do have to parse the XML, so it's a little tricky to figure out the syntax. I included here just the columns I think are the most useful when I'm looking at the X event and I'm trying to audit something a user's doing. So then if you want to do something else, you kind of have to you got to figure out, you go through the XML and figure out how it would fit into this, grabbing those values. So it can be a little tricky, but it's much nicer when you want to centralize the data, which I do, and then report on. And then I provided you an example. So that's the stuff I'm saying that you might see coming through, like select, add SPID and stuff. I created a database. Create database testing too, but all that other stuff is just me either querying the extended event and or stuff happening in the background. So that's what I'm talking about. You might see a lot of stuff you didn't realize that's going to happen behind the scenes. So there's also a way to do an extended event that's just kind of quick. You can just launch a session there's an extended event profiler down at the bottom. It even calls it X event. See, I got to stop calling it extended event under SQL Server agent. So you can just say right click and say launch a session, and it just starts. It gives collecting everything that's happening. In case somebody says, oh, I don't know, something's happening right now, I want to see, or just want to take a peek, then just make sure to stop it when you're done. So the other way to audit SQL Server is with something called SQL Server Audit. It's pretty lightweight and flexible too. It's actually quite flex. I think it's actually better for auditing what users are changing, if you ask me, because some of the nuance you can do with it, as far as like what exactly is changing. And I'll show you a little bit more of that in a sec here. But this screenshot here just shows you if you set up an audit, what all the little bits and pieces where they all go. Those are not there by default. I just wanted to show you that's where they all wind up if you use them. So in order for this to work though, SQL Server audit, you need to have an audit specification. So that's like the top level, say, that's where you're gonna set how many files, where they're gonna live. You can also write to application or security log as well. And then you need that before you set up server audit or database audit, because the database and server audit are gonna actually use the audit specification to put the data in there. And the audit specification is like where it says, oh, I'm gonna write this stuff. So you can't write anything without that. So the server audit is also first available in 2008, then it was only an enterprise. And then 2012, 2014, the server audit part became available in all editions. And then by 2016, it's fully available in all editions, like really nice because, you know, I was on enterprise for everything. So a couple of use cases. So server audit, I mean, imagine it can audit at the server, but at the server level, but it also can do every database the same way. So if you wanted to say, I want to see all the perms and schema changes at the server level and all the databases, then you use a server audit for that. Now, database audit's good for if you said, I only want to see one database. So in that case, you would just do server audit for server stuff. You do a database audit just for that one database or a subset of activities in the database. Because at a database level, you can do things like insert, updates, deletes, which you cannot do at the server level on a database. So there's some things that is more powerful in database audit because you can get all kinds of things. Like developer comes to me and says, I don't know who's using this table. Then I can go and use this database audit to say, oh, I can see who's selecting, inserting, update, deleting from there. So. And then this here again shows you the locations where you can create these and you just right click on them. So the audit specification, the server audit are in the security section at the server level. And then each database, if you wanted to set up a database audit, it's actually inside the database security area. So then you just right click and it'll bring up a GUI. And you can just click in the GUI. The thing with the GUI I find difficult is that I inadvertently pick the same action twice, or I miss an action. I think, oh, why is this not collecting? Because it's harder in the GUI, I think. I didn't provide a screenshot here because I thought I didn't have enough time really. But anyway, it's a lot easier, I think, with scripts. If you don't know how to use SQL Server Audit, though, of course, you can go in and set up one with the GUI. Then you can script it out and you can see, and this is what the script would look like. So you can always right click and say script it to the window, or, you know, so you can see it. And then this is what you would wind up with. Audit specification. Again, like I said, I don't put it on a C drive or something. I don't want it to inadvertently fill up, even though I set the max size to 50 megs and max files 4. I just definitely don't want it to be, I don't want it to get too big, because again, the same thing happens with these files as extended event files, is they get so big and they're very hard to query. So anyway, some other options here as well. The thing with the GUI to note is when you create an audit specification or any of the audit components, they are disabled by default. And so here in the script, I just enable it at the bottom. So that way I don't go crazy thinking, why is this not collecting anything? Because I didn't enable it. So then my script also takes care of that. So it's a lot nicer. And then you have a server audit. So this script here is going to get any perms and schema changes at the server level. So that's what all these add statements do. So you're creating a specification, a server audit, and you're going to associate it to that audit specification we just created on the previous slide. And then you're going to add all these actions, because if there were no actions, then nothing would happen. So all these actions here, add database role, member change, those kinds of things, they're actually auditing things. I have a resources slide that will give you, that gives you a link, could give you more description of what each of these do, because they could be a little confusing just listed. And again, with state on, right? So that, so we make sure it's actually collecting something. And then here's our database audit. This is going to get only for the auditing database schema and perms changes. And like I said, if you did this at the server level already, if you said that last slide, so this last slide, this is going to get auditing database already if we applied this to the server. But let's say let's say you didn't want to get all the databases. Now you just take out the ones that start with schema database, because then you're just going to get server stuff. And then you're like, I just want to audit the auditing database. Then you would apply this to the auditing database, because then it would be easier. So then once you have it set up, you can view the audit logs just right in the GUI, and it brings up this window and loads a bunch of stuff. It's very difficult to read. I think it's a good for like a high level, like, oh, hey, it's working, I think. And maybe you see nothing, like I told you, it could be nothing or it could be a ton. But then you got to click through each line and see the details in the selected row, and I think that's kind of a pain. So I decided that, you know, obviously scripting it was better and I could centralize it. So this script here, you call a function, you don't have to parse XML. So that's really nice. It's much easier. You just like list a column name, and there's a bunch more columns in there. These are just the ones that I think are the most helpful. And then these are stored in UTC time, just so you know. And that's why I have a function in there to convert it, because I don't want it in UTC. I get confused sometimes, like, what's going on? Why isn't this weird time? How did that happen then? It was because I realized, oh, it's in UTC time. And I realized I forgot to stop after extended events to ask it, let anybody ask questions. So oops, I'll stop in a sec. So anyway, SQL Server auditing can also do the auditing of one user state. So I showed you with extended events how you could do, say, where the user was SA. And so you can do that with SQL Server auditing as well. I also added schema name does not equal sys, just as an example to show you, you can filter on other things. Sometimes sys schema can be used a lot and things in the background. So in this case, I have more of my bold red here, because I'm going to create a server audit. See, I've separated this. I generally speaking like to keep my perms and schema changes in a separate audit specification. And then that way I can pull it in to report on for auditors. But in the case of, if I want to see what everything SA is doing, the auditors don't really want to see that. So I just put that in a separate audit specification. That's what I'm creating here on the left side of the slide. And then what I do is create another server audit specification. And those ones in bold red, those two are going to get pretty much everything it's doing, like select, insert, update, everything, execute, all the kind of stuff. Plus all these other actions will get all the things it's also changing, like DDL or perms. So those can be dangerous though. So I always say filter, because if you just apply this across your entire server, like everything, it's going to get big. And that's when my horror story came in and I crashed SQL Server. So that's a whole, I'll tell you that story in a sec. But I just want to stop for a sec to see if there were any questions really quickly about those things. I kind of covered a lot, but let's see.
I don't see anything in the chat. This is really great information, though. This is my first time learning about audit specifications, so this is really fantastic.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad. I have a longer version, actually. It's on the resources slide for the SQL Server audit. So in case anybody's interested in a more detailed version of audit, SQL Server audit. So anyway, I just want to go through some pros and cons. So the pros of extended events, it's really pretty easy to get started. There's templates in there. If you go in the GUI and you do the wizard, especially, you've got drop downs, and it'll even say things that look like Profiler when you used to use in the drop downs. It's like that. It'll feel really familiar to you. It'll feel very easy. And then it's easy to view them in the GUI. The events as they're happening. It's a little cumbersome though if you actually want to see any details. So the con is that you have to parse the XML on the query, and so that's a little tricky. Once you get used to it and you have some sample scripts, it's pretty straightforward, but getting used to it's a little bit tricky. But it's really the way, in order, to centralize things, you're gonna have to put, get a query for it to do that. So SQL Server audit, pros and cons too. So it's also easy to view the audit log in the GUI. And I think it's actually a bit more straightforward to specify what you want to audit or not. Let's say you just want to audit somebody's, like, creating a login or something. It's going to be more difficult in extended events. And in the audit, you had all those actions, all those add statements in the server audit, database audit. Those are the things you can kind of like compartmentalize. You're like, well, I just want to collect perms changes, not schema changes. And so it's much more powerful for auditing. I think it's really a lot more powerful for narrowing down the auditing. And you don't have to use XML to query it with SQL query, so that's really nice. But I do think overall it is more complicated. It has more moving parts and pieces. With extended events, you have that one file. And with the audit, you've got potentially multiple different pieces and parts, and there's no templates to guide you. So it's just a little bit more of a steeper learning curve. So here's some quick comparisons. I'm just going to highlight differences here because some things are similar and some things are not. So the one main thing is you cannot delete or modify a SQL audit if it's running. You have to disable it. And that's actually when my horror story happened. So I'll still tell you about that. I'm still just getting to that. I'm stealing myself for that story. And so then there's also different ways you can save extended events in SQL Server audit. I mean, I don't think that makes a big difference in whether you should use one or the other, but there's just different ways you can store them and different types of files that they get stored in. So the big difference with querying a SQL Server audit with a SQL query is that you don't have to parse the XML, right? So that makes it easier to at least query it. And then one thing that I found troublesome with SQL Server audit is that when a developer asks you that, okay, how am I going to figure out what user is writing to a table? The problem with SQL Server audit is that you don't get the host or IP info of where the user was coming from until 2017. So nice with extended events, you were getting that. And so it's a little bit more difficult because you see the user, you're like, huh, okay, but what server is that coming from, or where, you know, who knows? So, but it helps them, it helps them narrow it down at least. And so SQL Server audit does not have templates, but extended events does. And nicely, extended events only requires that one item, whereas SQL Server audit requires at least 2 and potentially 3. And then extended events it's a little bit more powerful in the sense that you can do other stuff with it as well. So SQL Server audit is just for auditing, whereas extended events, you can do all kinds of other stuff like wait stats or connection tracking, all kinds of stuff. So again, my bull red and then my horror story of I literally froze up. I froze up a production server because I was trying to stop my SQL Server audit. And then, well, nothing worked because the audit wouldn't stop. And then no transactions would commit on the server. And I didn't have something crazy set up where you can do a SQL Server audit. You can say, don't allow the transaction to complete unless you can audit it. You can tell SQL Server to shut the server down if it can't audit what somebody's doing. And now that could be useful in the case of maybe a legal server or financial server. That was not the case on this server. I said continue. If you can't audit something, just continue. The problem became that it was a very large database. It was a high transaction server, as you can imagine, since it was so large. And it was just like constant things hitting. I had to get select statements, which I don't recommend doing because of PCI. So we had credit cards stored in there. So we had to do that. And so then, like I said, I got in a loop. I had to restart the server. I had to bounce the service in the middle of the day and cause an outage. So yeah, so less is more. Besides the fact that even if you don't crash your server, if you audit so much that you can't pick through it, you can't query the files, you can't, there's just so much of it. It's like you didn't audit at all because you can't find anything. So anyway, I didn't think it was possible. That's why I tried to recreate it actually in 2019 SQL Server. But once the audit captures a statement, even if it's long running, it's like, okay, I got that statement. But the problem is when many statements are coming one after the other, then it can get overloaded. So anyway, fun times. So here's some resources for you because that's a lot. And I even dragged this out way farther than I was going to do. Gave you way more information speaking wise than I would have. So here's some links. And that's the full length presentation I mentioned on YouTube for the SQL Server auditing part. And then some more stuff on extended events there, because this was pretty high level, quick stuff. And so are there any questions? Anything else that I can tell? I think I'm done.
No, this was wonderful. A lot of great information. I do not see any questions in the chat. So if you have anything, we've got a couple more minutes before the end of our official time.
Okay.
But yeah, no, this was great. Like I said, I had not heard of the SQL audit before, so this was really great introduction to it and saying, oh, this is a really cool thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've got a quick recommendation as to when you would use SQL audit over extended events, maybe?
That's a good question. Honestly, when I was doing this, I pretty much, okay, so how I do it anyway is, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the right way, but I use SQL Server Audit when I want to get perms and schema changes that I want to get to the auditors, right? So I just want to see all that stuff across the entire server, and it's easy, I think, with SQL Server Audit. Now, if I wanted to get one user like SA, then I used extended events. Because it just gets everything for that user, and you don't have to try to know all the different, remember those red bold things I added and said that's how you get everything SA does. It's a little more complicated. So I think if I was going to audit one user and everything they did, I would use extended events. And then of course there's the use case where the developer comes to you and says, who's using my table, or who's using this table, not their, well, it might be their table. They feel very, very strongly about it. So I would use then SQL Server Audit, because you can go easily with the audit down to like select, insert, update, delete, execute, all kinds of things. It's much more complicated with extended events to do that. So those are just a few use cases, and I think how I would use these things.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I just wanted to say really quickly, thanks for everybody for attending. And thanks to Data Geeks, and Deborah, thanks for moderating. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm happy to. Like I said, this is great. I learned something new, and so that's why we come. We always want to learn something new that's going on. So
Exactly. So yeah, feel free to contact me. Anybody, anybody watching, ask me questions. You can email me or us, talk to me on Twitter or whatever. I am in the chat that's like lobby or what, I don't know what they called it. Anyway, I'm over there for a while too, in case anybody comes up with anything they want to ask. So happy to have a dialogue.